gonna hit start video. And there she is. Yep. Cool. Nope, there are 34 people on. 37, 39, 40. There's a lot of people on. Yeah, you also got a tease for audio.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Sorry about the confusion.
Who's posting feedback?
My speaker is not working.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Can I get a couple of chat replies? Cool. Thank you. All right, I guess we'll get started in about a minute or two. And people are still joining. Hope everybody's doing well. Okay, I have no idea where that picture came from. I have no idea. Joseph is here. We can get started now.
How are you doing, Professor?
I'm doing okay. Going a little crazy.
Same.
Maybe I've already gone crazy. I don't know. Are you familiar with the term batshit crazy? I'm kind of getting close to that. All right. Well, I guess let's see how many. Oh, I lost my. We have 78 people. Okay, that's a pretty good. That's a minion in my book. So I guess we'll get started. So where did I want to start? So chapter 7. So I guess let's just do a little bit of review of what we've covered so far on that. All right. And I started the chapter, not in last week's lecture, but a little bit before that. I had posted a short video about conformity to the federal income tax law, which which really all of the states adopt in one form or another. And all of that, and a great example of that came up during the week, and I think I posted a problem to everybody during the break since the last class, and that was so Congress, since we last met, passed this enormous, mostly it's a bailout law, but it also has a lot of tax provisions in it, and among them, they changed the net operating loss rules, allowing carryback, extended carryback, like 5-year carryback. They changed the Section 163I limitation on the deductibility of interest, making it a lot more liberal. So, and they made that a retroactive change to 2019, and then they changed the depreciation rules. So what do we got? So now this is a very interesting state of affairs because conformity now comes into play. Have the states adopted that rule? And if a state has rolling conformity, then guess what? They just changed their tax laws as well for 2019 on a retroactive basis. Now, are they stuck with that change? Well, not necessarily. They can meet and adopt a modification telling people, well, to add back. If you got extra interest because of this recent change, they could via modification, the legislature and the governor could sign a law saying, okay, figure out the difference and add that back into taxable income. We're not prepared to be so generous on the 163J limitation. Now, on the other hand, let's say a state doesn't have rolling conformity. Let's say they're tied to the Internal Revenue Code on January 1st, 2020. Well, then these changes that the Congress just adopted don't affect those states, unless, of course, let's say they feel like, oh, that was a great change. We should adopt that as well. Their legislature has to meet and adopt the bill, making that a modification, or changing the date of Internal Revenue Code. These provisions, as a matter of fact, we've been going. You'll know adopted this law right at the end of March, which of course first quarter event. And not only did they make it a first quarter event, but they made it retroactive to last year. So now everybody has to go back and change for last year. Now, a few of you know about you may programs, but the expense that you record on the books, that's for federal and state at the end of each quarter. More interesting is the way are handled. So that's future items that is ones that will turn in the future. Of what the tax effect of that is matter, but then when they go and make the law, it drives our accounting people into a tizzy. And in fact, earlier today, I got a 40-page memo, which not that I really felt like reading it, a 40-page memo and associated with all of these retroactive changes, not a small part of which is how are the states going to handle the, which states have automatically accepted it, and and et cetera, et cetera. So it's we managed to make things so the world can never do without us. So that was my answer to the question that I had posted. And again, know that that's like a sure thing for the final one. There'll be at least one true false question. I'm sorry, did someone have a question?
Hello, Professor.
Yes.
Yeah, it looks like it's like a disrupt. It is something like disrupting. Maybe the connection.
Oh. Yes, we're getting that. I'm breaking up.
Yeah, it's breaking up here.
Oh, maybe I should take it off. I think that is part of the problem, is that the internet is being overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly.
Is this
It's
last week, did we?
Yeah, the internet signal is weak.
People are asking, can I repeat the last 5 minutes? And I'm sure I can, but I should wait until our issue clears up. How's it now? How am I coming through? Coming through now.
Oh, it's still the same thing.
Some people are saying it's coming better, much better.
Yes.
It's better now. All right. So I'll tell you what, just somebody, last week we started a little bit later and maybe the internet was a little less crowded Why don't we keep going? Okay. Now I'm breaking up again. It's funny. I'm hearing all of you very well.
Naeem wants to give a lecture, looks like.
Hello. I'll tell you what. Could everybody else mute? Maybe that'll help. Could everybody mute, please? How am I here? Can you hear me now? Why don't I start again? And I see some people wrote that there's a new update on Zoom. Yeah, but I think I actually did adopt the new. I took that in already about a half an hour ago. I accepted the changes to Zoom. So anyway, all right. So I really didn't cover anything particularly important so far, but the problem that I had posted about the rolling and fixed conformity came into focus this last week when federal law changes were adopted. And of course, the states with rolling conformity automatically changed those rules and such that so that all of these extra federal deductions are also deductions for the state. Legislature meets and votes that states that are on fixed conformity, they haven't adopted these federal changes, but of course the legislature could meet and adopt these changes. So again, my point was that this will be a question on the final exam, testing your knowledge of fixed and rolling conformity. I'll just move on a little bit. In the book was apportionality, or which I never understood why it's not apportionability, but we'll use Hellerstein's terms apportionality. And that, of course, I'm breaking up again. Well, I didn't say anything particularly important, so, but I just said that the linchpin of apportionality is of a unitary business. And is this better when I hold the microphone right to my mouth? Anybody? Can anybody hear me? Okay, I'll just stand like this and hopefully that'll work. So apportionality, the unitary business, that's all about having the pie, right? We lose you mid-sentence at points. All right. Well, maybe I should just speak in one-word sentences. The point of the unitary business is that's the pie that you end up slicing. You can't slice things up. And then we went through some cases on that, right? We went through Fargo, which was the American Express case. Exxon v. Wisconsin, remember that was the only thing that Exxon had in Wisconsin was the gas stations. So Exxon was the gas station part of their business. So it's actually, somebody just gave a good idea. Maybe I should disable the video. If I knew how to do that, I would be in good shape. Let's see. All right, if I hit stop video, I guess. Can you guys still hear me? Is that better? I'm hearing a lot of yeses, so I guess that's good. But now you can't look at me. Oh, that's even better. Ah, it is better. People are saying, all right, okay, now we can go on a roll here. All right, so Fargo, that was the American Express case. Remember that was they had a horse and buggy delivery business of packages that operated in Indiana, and they also had another business in New York. And basically, the Supreme Court argues that okay, you can't tax the businesses in New York. That's a separate pie, right? Indiana can only tax the pie that's operating within Indiana. Exxon versus Wisconsin, Exxon claims, hey, we got 5 different pies. We got exploration, we got refining, and the only thing that's operating in Wisconsin is the gas station business. So we think that business, and Wisconsin wins the case. They actually say, no, they don't want a piece of the gas station business. That's kind of boring. That doesn't make a lot of money. That's a tiny little profit. We want to be able to tax a smaller piece of Big Mama, right? Big Sugar Daddy. We want that in the pie. So they win that case, and the principles of the case is that it all operates as one. They look for oil, and then when they find it, they refine it, and then when they refine it, they sell it. And so it's all one big integrated business, and therefore it should all be treated as one pie. Bear with me. I see some people are saying I'm getting better and breaking up at the same time, so it's hard to judge. Hard to judge which is the. We then proceeded to Allied Signal, right, which brought in another theory of the case, right? They said, in addition to businesses being apportionable, assets can be apportionable. And the key thing there was whether or not a particular investment that the company was holding was part of the pie or not part of the pie. And the particular investment in question was a mining company, a Sarco, and it had very little interaction with the rest of the business, right? It was really seriously just a separate investment. And of course, probably even more telling was the fact that they didn't own 100% of it. They didn't even own 50%. They owned 27%, I think it was, of the subsidiary, which means that some of the key indicia of a unitary business was lacking. When you look at them in their totality, certain issues start coming out, or certain things that the court thinks is important. And basically, the key indicia of a unitary business are unity of management, unity of operations, and economies of scale. So if there's a uniform management over the entire company, that's an indicia of a unitary business. If there's operations, like there was an Exxon back and forth among the companies, that's an indicia, and then economies of scale. Now, I seem to recall last week that we talked about this a bit, and the question was asked, well, do you need all 3, or do you need 1 of the 3, or 2 out of the 3? And there's no answer to that question. This is the indicia, and may or may not. These are all issues for the court to consider. I see I'm getting a lot of breaking up again. Why don't we stay with it a little bit longer? Hopefully it'll get, well, hold on one second. Hey, Anna. Where's Anna? We're getting a lot of breaking up. Is there any ideas? I turned off the camera. Everybody's saying it's fading in and out.
Like the sound is fading in and out?
Yeah. I think it's just busy.
Yeah, I think. Can you ask them to turn off their cameras?
Guys, can you all turn off your cameras too? I'm seeing some of you. So I know some people have their cameras on. Maybe that would help. Yeah, ask Callie if she's. Oh. How am I coming in now? Okay. we're running through the house, turning off everything else that could be streaming. Okay, and as a matter of fact, maybe I should turn off, especially since I've gotten 95 emails while we've been talking. Maybe I should turn that all off. I did. You want to come in, Hallie?
Maybe you should try to close your other tabs.
Yeah, I'm going to shut everything else down.
Are their mics off too?
What?
Are they muted?
Not yet.
Have them mute themselves.
Do I want to close all tabs? No, I don't want to do that.
Once you close some tabs, also have them mute themselves and only unmute themselves if they need to talk.
Uh-oh, did I just lose them? I might have just lost them.
Really? I wanted to close some tabs.
Return to meeting.
No, you didn't lose us. We hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. My technical consultants are busy. The help desk is here. Let's see, last week was the Zoom doing in and out. It's that time of day, heavy traffic. But last week we didn't have this problem. It's almost 7 o'clock, so you would think that things would be getting a little bit better. God, I have 30 pages of notes. I'm still on page 1.
You could also hotspot from your phone. You can switch to your hotspot.
Switch to the hotspot?
Like your phone's data.
No, I don't think I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, it was working for me okay the other day. If you want to, I would maybe give this like 5 minutes, see if it gets better. I mean, are people saying that it's still cutting in and out?
Yeah, it's still cutting. They're saying they had the. It's way better now. It's funny how it just keeps fading. It keeps going up and down.
Good, better. It's way better. Yeah, they're saying good, good, better, better.
Okay. All right, guys, I'm just going to continue, okay? And hopefully as the night proceeds, the traffic on the internet will lessen a little bit. And
Yeah, it's recording.
yeah, we're recording it. Go away. Everybody can hear you, Hallie. Okay. Nobody wants to hear you. All right.
So if they start saying it gets bad again, let me know.
Okay. YouTube is next. I can try YouTube live stream. I paid for this. Okay. Anyway. All right. Hopefully the recording is coming out okay. So anyway, where was I? All right. So after we talked about apportionality or the pie, we then proceeded to talk about fair apportionment, and which we're right in the middle of right now. Some of the cases that we talked about was Hans Reese and Butler Brothers, and those two cases were kind of hard to sort of reconcile between them. You will recall in Hans Reese, they found they said the apportionment wasn't fair because they compared it to what separate accounting would be, and they said, all right, well, the difference was so great that it had to the outcome. It was constitutionally mandated that the court abandon apportionment. Then in Butler Brothers, they go out exactly in an opposite direction. They actually determined in that case that the company suffered an actual loss in California, but had a profit nationally. And in 1943, the Supreme Court rules that that's okay. That's a completely different. And it's hard to reconcile the two, except for one little fact that's apparent in the case, is that Hans Reese uses a one-factor property formula, and Butler Brothers uses the three-factor property, payroll, and sales. And so it's thought that perhaps, and Hellerstein points this out, perhaps three-factor formula is more stable and produces a more fair result, at least from a constitutional standpoint. So some people are pointing out that don't I know that Baruch has free Zoom for faculty? Yes, but there's too many things associated with it. I bought my own deluxe Zoom package just for you guys. All right, so the case that we're up to right now is Mormon Manufacturing versus Blair. Now, Mormon, this is Iowa back in 1978, does something interesting. They adopt a one-factor formula, and they're sort of going back in the direction of Hans Reese, except that they're not focused on the property factor. They're focused on the receipts factor instead. And this causes some stir. And in fact, Moorman is a maker of animal feed, and they're located in Illinois. And Illinois is a three-factor state, and because they're headquartered in Illinois, they have a lot of property, they have a lot of payroll in Illinois. So their overall percentage in Illinois is pretty high because Illinois is using the three-factor formula. Indiana, on the other hand, not Indiana, Iowa has adopted the single sales factor. Now, a big part of their business is selling animal feed to the farmers of Iowa. In fact, 20% of their customers are in Iowa. So they're pointing out that, hey, we're paying like 60% to Illinois, and we're paying 20% to Iowa, and God knows what we're paying everywhere else. So that this is manifestly unfair, this adoption of the single sales factor. And the case is a little weird when you read it, because you get the impression that maybe the reason why they lose the case is that the taxpayer simply doesn't produce sufficient evidence for the court to come out the way it did, so they sort of throw that in. It's sort of babble in the middle of the case. But at the end of the day, what they really decide is that, no, they can't make this assumption. Well, first of all, we all know that the internal consistency doctrine tells us that every formula is okay so long as if every other state adopted, there'd be no danger of double taxation. So they're sort of sticking with that here. They're saying the problem is not that Iowa did something wrong, and the problem is not that Illinois did anything wrong. It's just, look, it's just life. That's just the way things worked out. And they point out, we don't feel comfortable forcing the states under our dormant Commerce Clause powers. We don't feel comfortable ordering the states to all use the same formula. That's a job for the Congress. So they say here, again, just like in Quill, they say, hey, Congress, here's a problem. Why don't you go about resolving it? Except that they don't do that. So back in 1978, they adopt the single single factor. Now we're going to retreat back to that in a minute and sort of discuss this. I haven't gotten any complaints on chat. I don't know, did you all drop off, or can I get some feedback? Last couple of minutes have been okay? Good now, good. All right, thank you. Okay, so maybe traffic is getting a little bit better. All right, so let's talk about, do I want to talk about this? Note B, that wasn't the internet, that was me. Note B after the case just simply makes the point that I already made, that it's unfortunate that the court led you down the wrong path in the middle of the case by thinking that, maybe the taxpayer just did a bad job presenting evidence, but that's not really the issue here. So now, many states, so back in 78, Iowa was an outlier, right? So you had 49 states with a three-factor formula of property, payroll, and sales. Then all of a sudden, Iowa just adopts sales only. Now, since that time, many states have adopted the single sales factor, and all like within about the last 5-6 years. California adopted it. Actually, I think that was like back in 2012, they adopted it. More recently, in 2015, New York State adopted it. New York City adopted it in 2016. And then right around the same time, New Jersey adopted single sales. So why are they doing this, all of the states? Well, it basically takes the liability for the corporate tax and it passes it almost entirely on to out-of-state companies. Let me give you an example. And I'm just making these numbers up, okay? But they're probably pretty close to being true. So let's take a big New Jersey company like Johnson & Johnson, right? It's one of the 50 largest companies in the United States. So almost all of their property is in New Jersey. Almost all of their payroll is in New Jersey. So let's just say they were 90%, and then their sales, say, were 3% New Jersey, right? Because New Jersey is a fairly minor part of the national marketplace. So you add 90 plus 90 is 180. You add an extra 3, that's 183. Divide that by 3, and Johnson & Johnson paid taxes on 61% of their income in New Jersey. When New Jersey goes single sales factor, what happens? Well, you drop the 90, and now it's 3%. Good deal, huh? Johnson & Johnson just went from being a 61% taxpayer to a 3% taxpayer. They're loving that, right? And what happened to the out-of-state company? Well, their taxes went up. Let's say in the past, let's take the Boeing Corporation. They were 1% of their property was in New Jersey, 1% of their payroll, but 3% of their sales. Average that out. They were a 1.6% taxpayer, and now, dropping payroll and property, they're a 3% taxpayer. So they kind of doubled, while J&J fell from 61 to 3. Boeing went from 1.6 to 3. Well, was Jersey the net winner on that? Well, possibly, because while a handful of New Jersey companies plummeted, every single other company in the United States, their factors probably doubled in New Jersey. So, maybe something of a zero-sum game, especially when all of the states start adopting the single sales factor. But what seems unusual to me is that the court approached this. The court approached this on like prong 2, saying, well, whether or not this was a good apportionment or not, when in fact, it seems to me they should have probably looked at this from a prong 3 standpoint, in that this is all highly discriminatory against out-of-state business, right? Favoring the in-state interest against the out-of-state interest. So that seems to be where we stand today. Is that I would say out of the 50 states, probably like 30 of them or so are on the single sales factor. And so let's see, where am I? Okay. So after Mooresman, so the next note, oh, I guess maybe, did I do this out of order? I did do this out of order. Never mind, I already talked about note B. All right, so now let's go to note C, which follows. And by the way, can I get some feedback? Going good? Hearing is good? Thank you. Okay, so the next case in the book, and it's only covered in a note, is the Trinova case. And I actually posted, I posted a, just so that you could follow the numbers better, I posted this on class documents, just how the numbers work out in this case. And here is clearly a very distortive situation. Now, this isn't an income tax case. It's Michigan was, and they've abandoned it, but Michigan was the only state that used to have a value-added tax. And it was, of course, instituted at the behalf of the car industry, right? The car industry used to be centered up in Michigan, and they pretty much called the shots there. And they said they didn't like a state income tax; they wanted a value-added tax. A value-added tax is hard to explain. It tries to tax just the value that's added at that level. I know that really meant almost nothing to any of you, but the way it works is that you add, you figure out your taxable income, and then you add back into taxable income all of your salaries. And then you subtract from that all of the capital acquisitions that you made during the last year. But we're skipping that part. In this case, the focus was on the company. Trinova knew that all of their salaries were in Illinois. So they're saying, well, why guess? Why use the apportionment for the salary portion of the formula, right? There's the income part of the formula and there's the salary part. We can understand apportioning the income part, but why should we apportion salaries when in fact we know that all of our salary is incurred in Illinois? And that was what I sort of posted. If you believe Trinova's way of looking at it, their tax base was their $100,000 of income plus salaries of zero. So their base was $100,000 and they paid tax on $100,000. Michigan said, no, take your income, add back all of your salaries, even though they're from another state. So now we have $1 million in our base, and then we'll apportion that. So they're using the sales, property, and payroll factors, and we're apportioning the $1 million. And the tax actually works out to be 10 times higher. It ends up being 160,000 versus 16,000. And quite honestly, I've forgotten if these are the actual numbers in the case or these are just numbers I made up to illustrate the point. So that's a heck of a difference, right? The taxpayer is presenting outstanding evidence that his tax base is $16,000. And no, the government is saying, no, we think we should stick with the general formula. We said, stick with the formula and your tax is 10 times higher. The court upholds the use of the formula. So in other words, they don't think a 90% or I should say a 9, they don't think a 10 times. I guess it's 1,000%. 1,000% difference is a distorting number. Basically what they're saying is that, you know what, we don't think that as a constitutional matter that separate accounting defeats the apportionment scheme. Now I emphasize again that this is only from a constitutional standpoint. Don't worry, you're not stuck with this answer for other reasons. But right now, we're discussing the constitutionality of it. Okay, so they're simply saying, the Supreme Court is saying, hey, we're not going to overturn the apportionment formula. And especially here in Trinova, it was a 3-factor formula. So you would think, again, this is a great example of where separate accounting and a 3-factor formula are wildly different, but the court doesn't want to abandon it. And you're almost feeling at this point that it's almost impossible to overturn. From a constitutional standpoint, it's almost impossible to overturn the apportionment. So note D seizes upon this particular point. He goes, so the big question, he titles it, note D, the big question, is it at all possible that from a constitutional standpoint, a court is going to overturn the apportionment answer? Is separate accounting going to be there as a remedy against apportionment? And Hellerstein goes, it's pretty rare that the court is going to throw out the formula. However, and this is the big however, because without this, my business would be pretty shot, is that state law, the states all pass provisions. And when we get to the UDIPTA statute at our next session, we're gonna see how that works. But almost every state has an apportionment formula in their apportionment section of their law. They have a provision that says, if you think that this is unfair, or if the government thinks this is unfair, both sides, you got two sides here, right? The government and the tax commissioner and the taxpayer. If either side thinks the number is bad, we, as a matter of state law, are going to allow either side to petition for a different answer. And that's where separate accounting comes in these days. It's not as a matter of the Constitution, it's a matter of state law or the state legislators making sure that both the taxpayer and the government had that option of questioning the apportionment. With me, any questions? How about we open it up for a question now? I haven't gotten any complaints. I think it's coming, I must be coming over fairly well. And I guess this means that in the future, we'll start at 7 rather than at 6:30. Any questions? Can I get some chat assurance that you can hear me? Thank you. Okay, you can stop now. That's great. Thank you. No question. So I came through loud and clear. So now you should all be asking yourselves, so why, if Hans Rees was thrown out as being unstable, right, as an unstable, the single factor property, the single factor property or single property factor was thrown out as being unstable, but then in Butler Brothers and in Trinova, the three-factor formula is considered to be hunky-dory, right, and never to be questioned. So are we having an issue? Why don't we have the same issue with single factor sales? Why isn't that equally unstable? And to my surprise, Hellerstein, someone asked me this question about 5-6 years ago. I remember in the class, and I said, you know, that's a hell of a good question. I never really thought through from an intellectual standpoint, why is that bad? And I sort of, on my own, came up with my own answer. I thought it through a little bit. And so let me give you my own theory of the case as to how this works. So originally, the three-factor formula was thought of, hey, we're taking into consideration the three big aspects of a business, right? We're taking into consideration the people that work there, the capital that goes into making a company, and then, of course, the third big aspect is you can make the best products in the world, but if you don't sell them, if you don't have a marketing effort, you can't really sell them. So the sales factor sort of represents that aspect. So we're taking into consideration salesmanship, the marketplace that the company reaches. We're taking into place the people that work for the company, and we're taking into consideration the capital aspect, all of the property and plant that the company owns. And if we mush all three of those together, we come up with a great answer. But notice, think about it for a second, two of those factors are sort of input driven, right? By input, you have two big inputs in your company, right? You got your people and you got all of the physical plant that you need, right? Those are the two big inputs. And then you have one output. One factor looks at output, which is sales, which is, you know, oriented to where are you selling your product. So when you only had property, you were neglecting sales, but you were neglecting one of the two inputs, right? So if you only look at property, or you only look at let's say you only look at property and you don't consider payroll, you're only considering one out of two inputs. And if you only consider payroll and not property, again, you're only considering one of two inputs. If you only look at sales, you're considering 100% of the outputs. You're neglecting the inputs, but you're looking at the outputs. And I think that's why no one will ever, from a constitutional standpoint, no one will overturn single sales factor. It's just a different way of looking at it. Now, again, to retreat back to my earlier point, it seems to me this shouldn't be constitutional because it seems like an outrageous abuse of the in-state power versus the out-of-state power, but right, favoring local commerce over interstate commerce. That it seems extraordinarily abusive. And I don't, and many people have raised the point that it should probably be unconstitutional for that reason. Okay, so hope that one came through. And then there's just one more case that we have on fair apportionment, and that's the British land decision, which is a really interesting case. This is sort of, and it's cited quite a lot, even though it's not a U.S. Supreme Court case, and it never went further than New York. It's a New York State Court of Appeals case. Not shabby. The New York State Court of Appeals is one of the great appellate courts in the world, but still, it didn't make its way all the way up to the top. But interesting fact pattern here, and then a really weird decision. But it's sort of like they came to the right decision, but for the wrong reason. But so that's a little weird. But the way the case rolls out is that you have a company that just invests in real estate, and they basically have I think I forget which way it started. I think it started in Baltimore, and they were like, these guys were like the big landlords in Baltimore, and then they decided they wanted to diversify a little bit, so they started putting up a lot more buildings in New York State. It might have been the other way around, but I think they started in Baltimore, and then they moved, and they thought, well, we're doing good in Baltimore, we should probably do just as well in New York. So that's the company, right? They own office buildings in Baltimore and in New York. And then all of a sudden, Baltimore takes off. I guess this was a while ago this case came out. Baltimore does a lot. Remember they built the Camden Yards in downtown Baltimore, and that sort of, at least temporarily, and they built I think also the aquarium is there as well. If anybody's not been there, it's worth seeing. If they ever allow us to leave our homes again, of course. So downtown Baltimore is doing a lot better. So all of a sudden, the office buildings are worth a lot more, right down there in the Camden Yard section. And the company decides, hey, it's just a pile of bricks until you sell it. So they sell one of their buildings, and they make a $13 million profit. And guess who's got their hand out saying, hey, I'd like a piece of that $13 million profit, and that being New York. So again, this company is operating in two places, Baltimore and New York, and they make a big profit in Baltimore, and New York's got its hand out saying, hey, it seems to me this is a unitary business, so it's one big pie, and we want our slice of that pie. And it's kind of an interesting case because, if there's any business that really lends itself to separate accounting, it would certainly be real estate, right? Because you know how much money each of your buildings made if you had a whole bunch of buildings, And so this was a little strange. So basically, they go to the New York Court of Appeals, and British Land, which is the taxpayer, they raise the point, hey, we're not apportionable. They raise both possible defenses. They say, hey, we're not apportionable. And then just in case we're wrong on that point, it's not fair apportionment. So they actually lose. And this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It's like they got this like ass backwards, this case. The New York Court of Appeals says, we really do think this is one unitary business. All right, so that's a little strange. But then they go, but the separate accounting this is not fair accounting. This is not fair apportionment. New York is not entitled to tax a piece of this gain. It's just a little off the wall what New York is advocating. So the taxpayer ends up winning the case, but arguably for the wrong reason. I would have argued, and Hellerstein makes the point in his case, that he would have argued that it wasn't a unitary business and that fair apportionment probably should not have entered into it. And but I guess anyway that you win. In his parting notes to the case, he goes, he sort of sums up his feeling about when separate accounting from a constitutional standpoint. When Hellerstein would take this case on contingency, right? He's talking my language now. He's talking contingent fees. He goes, when would I ever take a distortion case on a contingent fee? Well, I would only do that if I had a British Land type set fact pattern, because then I would feel confident I would win the case. I would get this gigantic fee, and I'd feel, really good about that. So here's my segue. So you all deserve a little segue from talking about taxes for a second to talking about practice in general. So I think you'd all welcome my little, I prepared a couple of extra interesting little stories for tonight. So I in the past, people have always told me they enjoyed the stories. So in practice, there are two types of fees that you can earn. You can earn hourly fees and you can earn contingent fees, right? Which is basically you're assuming the risk of a good outcome. Very endemic to law in the United States is the contingent fee. It doesn't really exist elsewhere in the world, but it exists in the United States. And basically it allows poor people to try cases, right? Let's say you feel you have a case against somebody, and let's say you feel like you were unjustly thrown out of your job, right? You were fired from your job, and you feel like you were discriminated against, and therefore you have a cause of action against the company. You go to the lawyer, and and the lawyer goes, I don't want to take a contingent fee. You got to pay me. Let's say this is England. Okay, so in England, they don't have the contingent fee set up. So you go there, the lawyer goes, I need $30,000 to try the case. Well, how much could I win? You could win 40,000. So you're thinking to yourself, I should pay 30 to possibly win 40. That's not, and I might lose. I don't think I want to do that. So the United States is the legal system is geared up on the contingent fee such that it provides everyone equal access to the courthouse, right? So in that case, you go to the lawyer, and the lawyer goes, "You want to pay me hourly? It'll cost you $30,000." You go, "No. How about you take a contingency?" So basically, in that case, and usually a contingency is a third, the lawyer is going to get a third of the $40,000 judgment. He's going to get a bigger amount because he took a bigger risk in taking on the case. And of course, the thing that you always want to measure is that when you take on a contingent case, you always take it on the theory that somehow you're going to win the case very quickly, and you're not going to pile up a ton of time, right? As they tell you on the first day of law school, you don't make money trying cases which take years and years, and you could lose. You make money settling the case, right? You want to win. You want to win a third of $10 million and wait 5 years till you get your share of the 10 million, or do you want to in one day settle the case for $2 million and get your third of the 2 million? I think you want to do the latter. I know I want to do the latter. So that's sort of the contingent fee arrangement. Now, let me tell you the downside of contingent fees. So you might as well hear it from me, right? Because when you go to work, you're going to be encouraged to try to take on as much contingent work as possible. And I will tell you, in any large firm, it's a mixed bag. Even in a small firm, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed blessing when you take these types of cases on, because what happens in a contingent fee, unless you can get a quick settlement, your case is going to linger and linger and linger, and you're spending more and more time on it, and the charges are getting up. All of a sudden, there's 25,000 on the WIPs, then there's 50,000 on the WIP. The WIPs are the billing statements, that you work from, the work in progress statement, and before you know it, you have $100,000, and your boss is bugging you. When are we going to collect on this 100,000? And you have to say, I don't know. Who knows? I can't even get a court date to get the case heard. So it's funny. I was talking to some lawyers recently, and I said, "Do they hound you on the contingent? Do you take on contingency fee cases?" And they go, "Yeah, but I'll tell you, it was basically the same story as me." They go, "Yeah, we hate doing it because then people hound you and hound you. When are we going to collect the money?" But so I thought you would enjoy. Oh, and I'm sorry. Let me just go back. But I think I told you earlier in the semester I made my reputation, made considerable funds on a contingency, a huge contingency case that I took on, that I settled in 2 or 3 days, and we got like a $7 million fee out of it. So that unfortunately that only occurs once or twice in a career. But anyway, I thought you would enjoy this story of one of my colleagues who used the whole contingent fee thing in a completely different way. And this was a colleague of mine. He was an eminent partner in the firm, but he was getting up there in years, and he was concerned, just like a lot of people are, that when they get older, that they're going to suddenly be let go from the firm. So he suddenly signs up this big contingency fee case, and he's telling everybody, it is $50 million at stake. Our fee is going to be $15 million, and everybody's going, great. So when's the case going to resolve? He goes, 3 months. And then, of course, you meet every month. And then a month later, we meet. We're going over our fees. How much money are we going to bring in this month? It's sort of like the mob meeting, and you're telling the big boss how much money you're contributing that month. So, and I say how much I think I'm going to collect that month. And the next guy goes, and this guy goes, yeah, I'm working on this big contingency fee. When's it going to pay you off? 3 months. And then sure enough, every month for a year, he would say it was going to pay you off in 3 months. And then I said, by the way, what is this issue that you're trying? And he says, I really don't want to discuss it. I don't want to talk about it. So it really got my curiosity up. Like, what is this big, what is this big state case that has such a huge amount of money at stake? So I was being sneaky. I started asking the staff about it, and they said, it's kind of weird that we keep. I think the state we're in court and we're getting heard, but we keep telling the judge to hold off, and we keep making supplementary submissions every month. We keep telling the judge to defer because we keep thinking of more angles and more things and more great ideas and more reasons that we're going to win the case. Anyway, like a year goes by, and finally there's a decision in the case, and I'm reading it in the Reporter, and it's like about a 60-page decision. Now, usually, if you have to win a case, and let's say there's 10 points you have to prove, if you don't prove one of those 10 points, you lose the case. And usually the judge will just say, well, he didn't prove point number 1, therefore you lost. No, this judge must have had some was aggravated about the whole situation, and he goes, okay, here's point number 1. Here's why point number 1 was stupid. Then he goes, okay, here's point number 2. Here's why point number 2 is stupid. And he just goes on and on. It was one of the most merciless opinions I've ever read in my entire life. He was just saying that every point raised by the taxpayer was completely ridiculous. So then we have our monthly meeting, and this person goes, so they ask, so what do you got? Oh, well, there was a decision in the case. We lost, but we're appealing, and we're almost certain to win the appeal. Oh, when will that take place? 3 months. So, and another year goes by, and the appeal comes out, and they say, yeah, the trial judge got it right. This was the most ridiculous case ever brought. But this guy got exactly what he wanted, which was 2 more years of employment at $1 million a year, and it was, and it worked out really well for him. So I usually get a big laugh. I hope you're all chuckling to yourself, but there are ways of manipulating the system, and I always thought that I always enjoyed that story, and I don't say it out of malice towards this person. I'm mostly pissed because I didn't think it up. This is the kind of thing I wish I had dreamed up and had stumped my my employer with. Okay, now I need feedback from chat that you thought it was a funny story. But the next story I tell later tonight is smack on. You're all going to be on the floor laughing. No feedback. Great story. Thank you. All right. You have an A for the course. Okay. It was 8 over 10 funny. Okay. Thank you. All right. Later tonight, Philip, later tonight, it's going to be 10 over 10 funny. I guarantee you. Okay. So you got to hang on to the end. All right. So what? I'm getting great feedback on the story. Okay. So one more topic I wanted to bring up on unitary, and I'll tell you right now, it's only going to take, circle this one in red, because it's only going to take like 3 minutes to tell you what the issue is. But I can tell you right now, it's a sure thing for the final. It's 100% certainty that this will be on the final. So you really want to pay, in 3 minutes, you completely master this one. And this is the issue of instant unity. So let's say, I'm just making this up. So let's just say General Motors tomorrow bought Ford. Are they a unitary business, or are they 2 unitary businesses? Are they, in other words, are they 1 pie or 2 pie? Well, clearly they're all in the car business, right? But the issue is really whether or not is whether or not the company becomes unitary right away, and that's the subject of instant unity. Now, most states say that, well, you become unity, you become 1 big pie. The 2 pies become 1 pie, like that. I just snapped my fingers. I snapped it again. Okay, so you immediately become a unitary business. Other states say, well, and this is not really a hard set rule, it's more of a presumption. Other states, and I think this started with California, not California, it was with Colorado, was that Colorado actually came out with a guideline that said, you know, we think as a general rule of thumb, it takes 2 years to become unitary. With, you know, company A acquires company B. It takes 2 years. So for the states that sort of subscribe to this theory of instant unity, it's basically the rule is as follows. It's something close to this. Okay, so. And I think I'm citing the Colorado rule pretty clearly. They say in the first 2 years, we're going to presume that you're non-unitary, even if it's General Motors and Ford. We're going to presume that you're non-unitary. But taxpayer, you can rebut the presumption if you want. So in other words, you could present evidence that, you know, to show that no, we fired everybody immediately, and you know, we took over the company, we got rid of the dead wood in like 4 minutes, which is usually what happens in a takeover, right? They fire everybody in the company that's acquired. So for the first 2 years we presume it's non-unitary. Then after 2 years the presumption flips, and we say, okay, now the presumption is that the two companies are unitary, except that the taxpayer can present evidence that they're not unitary, that they're not getting their act together. And, you know, recently, well, maybe not really, I guess, well, maybe it was like a year and a half ago, I had a big case that entirely rested on this issue of instant unity, in that what happened was one company acquired another. Wait, do I have it right? Yeah, okay. So one company acquired another company, and they were both in the same industry. And what they then did for the acquired company was they had this very promising drug that cured this disease. It was almost like someone had the vaccine for this, what's circulating right now, right? So that would be immensely valuable. So the parent, which was a West Coast company, acquired this East Coast company. And you notice I got to guard I have to guard everyone's secrecy. And they had this like cure to some disease. So they paid through the nose for the company, for the lower tier company. And then like 5 days after they acquired them, they sold off all the foreign rights to this drug. And so the company made, like, you know, the foreign rights for the next 18 years, something like that. And they got like a $10 billion payment for that. And then the question was, well, did the company become unitary, right? Did the two companies become unitary in the first 9 days of acquisition? And it was funny. It was a very eventful 9 days. In the case that I had to prove that it was unitary, and I had to also prove that the company's headquartered had left one state and joined this other state. So, which is the issue of domicile, which we're also going to cover tonight. And you know, I did my best. I put together this. You know, in those 9 days, they fired everybody at the. You know, they had been. You know, they had bought this company, and then they had like a 2-month period before it went final, before all the contracts. And during that 2 months, I was able to show that they fired everybody, and they were up and running. And then, you know, and once the 9 days had started, the company quickly became unitary, and the people on the West Coast were calling all the shots, and the board was replaced during those 9 days. So I came up with a fairly convincing argument that the company became unitary right away. So anyway, so these things do come up. But anyway, so that's the issue of instant unity. Any question on that? Again, it's basically a presumption. Okay, so, and not every state subscribes to it. So I will work in a story, you know, a problem dealing with this issue of instant unitary. With me? Any questions? Can you still hear me? Yes, great. Okay, stop. That's good. Thank you. Okay. So now we're going to move in to the second category of, well, this is what I call it. Okay, so you want, this is an instance where I created terminology which nobody else uses. So this is a Cormanism. So what I call phase 2 unitary. So up until now, we've been talking about unitary in purposes of the pi, right? Whether or not we had a small pi or a big pi. By the way, even though the video is off, I'm still like waving my hands in a way like you're supposed to like see my hands and understand, you know, and I should stop doing that, shouldn't I? So now we're going to talk about phase 2 unitary. But before I even get to that subject, before I forget, let me mention, and now get to your chat buttons real quick. Did any of you, did you hear from the school about the new grading policy for this semester? Yes, no? About the pass-fail option? Okay, great. So you don't really need me to go into it. I hope. Oh, yes, but unclear. What would you like me to discuss? I'm not sure that I can shed it anymore. Some people are saying no, so I guess I'll discuss it. So it would appear that, well, first of all, I think I told you that they liberalized the grading scale. So basically, it's like 35%. Wait, no, 45% A's and 55% non-A's. Now, keep in mind, what's a non-A? A minus is a non-A. So basically, they want, what was it? I think I put it on the email with when I gave out the midterm grades, but I think it was 45% A's, and I think it was 85% B or better. So it's pretty cool from that standpoint. But now they've added on even more and saying that you will have the option entirely at your discretion, if you don't like your grade for this semester only, you can turn it into a pass. So for example, let's say I give you an A minus, and everybody else in the program has given you an A, and I'm messing you up. I'm messing with your life. I'm destroying your life. So you can convert that, my A minus, to a pass if you want, and it doesn't enter into your grade point average. So I think that's cool. I mean, I think, it's not going to be for it's going to be for this semester and for the summer. I don't know if any of you take summer classes, but this pass-fail option is going to exist for the summer as well. In the fall, God forbid this is still going on, but I have a feeling it might be. So it might continue into the fall. But anyway, it's there. I think it's cool. I hope. I know a lot of you feel anxiety. I hope that this, maybe not for this class, maybe for some other class, but anyway, I don't know. Someone asked, would you recommend pass instead of letter grade if continuing with a new grad program? If continuing with a new, I don't know. How will it affect the transcript long term? I don't know. I don't know. I guess we, I just told you everything that I know. Do employers look at it as scans? I don't think they will, because, I mean, this is just such a weird semester, right? It's just different, right? You all signed up for an in-live class, and, clearly this is second best. And, if you can't even hear me when I speak, I guess most people would say that's a plus. I think all three of my girls, if they're listening, they don't seem to be listening. They would probably all recommend that they would love to never hear me speak. But anyway, I hope it seems to me, look, it's an extra choice that you have. So how could that be bad, right? If you have an extra choice. So anyway, I hope that's good news to some people. Anyway, sorry. So back to, I meant to mention at the very beginning, and naturally enough, I forgot to write it down in my notes. So I forgot to mention it to you. So I'm sorry that to change the subject out of nowhere. All right. So now let's go back to phase 2 unitary. So up till now, we've been using it in the apportionment sense of things. So now we're going to look at it in the multiple affiliated corporation setting. Okay. So not combined reports, that's next, that's phase 3 and phase 4. But now we'll talk about phase 2, which is the treatment of dividends that a corporation receives from its subsidiary. And the issue is that dividend part of the pie or not part of the pie? So just to sort of set up the facts for you, we have the parent company, which we'll call A, and A owns company B, owns 100% of company B, and B owns 100% of company C. And C pays a dividend up to B, and the issue is that part of the company B pile? And then P takes that pie, and then sub B takes that dividend, passes it up to parent A, and is that part of parent A's pie? And that's what this is all about, okay? And so, and the question is, I'm sorry, wait a minute. I'm all mixed up on my pages. The next case that we're going to talk about is Mobil versus Vermont. And as you read this case, you're going to say, gee, this reads almost exactly the same as Exxon versus Wisconsin, except that I think this case was decided first. So and I guess what's funny is that the other case involves Exxon, and this case involves Mobil, and they're now a single company, right? But back then, Mobil was Standard Oil of New York, and Exxon was Standard Oil of New Jersey. Of course, they're both in Texas these days. But anyway, back in 1980, Mobil Oil was headquartered in New York, right? Standard Oil of New York, and they did business all over the world, right? They had lots of foreign subsidiaries drilling oil, and Mobil Oil in the US was in many states, including Vermont. And in Vermont, just like in Exxon, all they didn't drill for oil in Vermont. God forbid they had an oil refinery in Vermont, right? That Bernie Sanders would never allow that to occur. So there were no oil refinery. The only thing that Mobil owned in Vermont were gas stations. So wouldn't you know it, it's exactly the same issue that came up in Exxon, and it's decided exactly the same way, except that the issue is ever so slightly different. The issue is that Mobil in the US, the Mobil company, the parent company, is receiving gigantic dividends from its foreign subsidiaries, right? I don't know, they're drilling for oil in Saudi Arabia, and they hit the gusher, and they made $1 bazillion, and they're paying that $1 bazillion up the check. Because what good is it in Saudi Arabia? They got to pay it up to the parent, so the parent gets the money, and Vermont is saying, hey, we'd like a piece of that dividend. And of course, Mobil filed their tax return in such a way saying that, oh, Vermont, you get none of that dividend. It's not part of the business. We only operate gas stations. You're not entitled to any of the exploration money that we made overseas. So they're saying, Mobil is saying, we got two pies, and Vermont is saying, oh, no. It's all one big pie, and we want our piece of that foreign income. Now, the competing, and here's where this case gets interesting, and I think I probably would have skipped this case, except for it's for the first time it gives us a chance to discuss the importance of domicile. Mobil is arguing that this is a separate pie, and that the only state that can tax the dividend coming up from Saudi Arabia is New York, because that is our domicile state. And so why is, and how is that entering into this? Why is the domicile so blessed to be able to tax 100% of the dividend? Well, remember, apportionment is all about non-residents, right? If you're a company that's operating in 50 states, your domicile, in theory, can tax you on whatever they want to tax you on. They don't, but they could. The apportionment rules always apply in the the 49 non-resident states that you're in, right? This is all about the fairness to the non-resident. It's all about the fairness to the non-resident. So Mobile is arguing here that 49 states cannot tax, because they have gas stations in all 50 states. 49 states cannot tax their dividend. The only state that can tax their dividend is New York. Now, by the way, New York, in the rules that were in place prior to 2015, and that this is 1980, New York chose not to tax dividends that came up from subsidiaries, but that was New York's choice. New York's theory was always that New York always wanted to encourage holding companies to organize in New York, and therefore they exempted from taxation any income that came up from subsidiaries. But that was New York's choice, right? They could do whatever they want. New York doesn't have to even impose a tax at all if they don't want to. So Mobile's being a little disingenuous here because they're saying, hey, only New York can tax it, but of course New York chooses not to tax it. That's why we're headquartered there. And Vermont, you're not entitled to tax this at all. So let's now for a moment discuss this whole issue of domicile, because I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think we're introducing it for the first time tonight. Maybe we discussed it earlier. Hey, it's always good to discuss things twice. So let's talk about domicile. And it's always good when you talk about domicile to start with individuals. All of you, every single one of you, has a domicile. I have a domicile. Every single person on earth has a domicile. The rich guy that's got 13 homes in 13 countries, that's great. He's got 13 homes. He has only one domicile. The poor bum sleeping in the park, he doesn't have any home at all, but he has a domicile. So it's by definition, it's one of these things by definition, we all have a domicile. So what determines what the domicile is? Well, basically it's a state of mind more than anything else, particularly with individuals, not so much with corporations, but with individuals, it's a state of mind. And of course, this issue comes up over and over again for a lot of reasons. In individual state taxation, one of the tests of residency is, are you domiciled in a particular state? And so that's one of the ways in. There are other ways of being a resident. And so the resident state can tax you on all of your income, although they typically give credits for taxes that you pay to other states. So the domicile, oh, and then also when a person passes away, the domicile state can tax the person's estate. As you can imagine, one of the great recurring themes of the estate tax courts is always a person lives in New York half the year. They in the summer they're here in New York, in the winter they're down in Florida, and of course then when they pass away, Florida wants to tax the estate and New York wants to tax the estate, or New Jersey wants to tax the estate. And that's always a fascinating exercise, is because only one of them can tax the estate. So therefore a battle arises, and it has to be determined where was the domicile. So what is it? And what is the indicia of domicile? Well, for individuals, it's normally, where does that person think? What does that person think of as their home? Like, if we can get inside his brain, in his mind, where is the place that he considers to be home? Now, what we see all the time, and we see this because certain states don't have an income tax, such as like Florida doesn't have a personal income tax. So you get a lot of people who live up here in the north where the taxes are high, and they have a home down in Florida, and they try to maintain that their and they spend more than a certain number of days, more than 183 days in Florida. So they say, hey, I passed the residency test for Florida. I don't pass the residency test for New York. Well, it's hard for courts to get inside a person's head and try to determine where would they rather be. And it's like a long list of like about 25 things that are considered. Well, the one that always, like, for example, where does the person vote? Where are the person's children? Where is the person's wife? Where are his country club memberships? Where are all these different things that make us? And one of them is, where does he keep his near and dear things, such as his 4th grade penmanship award, or things of that nature? Where do you keep your key stuff, right? That's probably the domicile of that person. And constantly you'll see cases where people, billionaires try to move to Florida, and they try to argue that they're domiciled there, but then they end up spending 100 days back in New York doing this and that. And of course, New York gets offended by that, and they start arguing, no, this person is really domiciled in New York and therefore should be filing a New York resident return. Some of the most challenging cases I've ever had deal with this issue of individual domicile. I had a famous person once that died, and New York and Connecticut were both competing, and Connecticut said, well, the guy's wife he had a house and his wife lived in Connecticut. And then I sort of was looking into it, and I found out that this guy hadn't really lived with his wife in about 30. He never divorced her, but he was secretly gay. This was 30 years ago, when people like kept this very secret. And he was actually gay, and he had a relationship with someone else in New York. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized, I'm not gonna be able to win this case. This guy was really domiciled in New York rather than Connecticut. I'm not going to say who it was. So, and then I had another interesting. I feel like I told this story recently to somebody. I had a couple of years ago. This was a sad case where this guy was a casino executive in Atlantic City, and then he went to Las Vegas. He got a great job in Las Vegas, like running a casino, but his wife didn't want to live out there. She had just started this little business that didn't even make any money, and she had been waiting her entire life for the kids to get older, and then she wanted to run her own business, so she stayed behind in New Jersey. He went to Las Vegas, and then while he was in Las Vegas, they gave him stock options, and the company was acquired by somebody else, and he lost his job, but he didn't care about that. He got like $10 million in stock options. He had all this loot, and guess what? He gets contacted by New Jersey saying, hey, we heard about all this great news that you just had. Where's our share? We noticed that you didn't report the 10 million. And he came to me, he goes, imagine these guys, this is crazy. How can New Jersey, I've been living in Las Vegas for the last 2 years. And I said, so I'm going over the facts with him. I go, so you only lived there? You had a house there? I go, well, no, I had like a hotel room. I said, oh, well, you didn't have a house? He goes, oh, no, my wife was in the house back in New Jersey. Oh, and he had moved back to New Jersey, after he lost his job in Los Angeles, he moved back to New Jersey. So I said to him, well, what makes you think? He goes, I didn't pass the residency test for New Jersey. I said, yeah, but New Jersey's going to argue that your domicile was in New Jersey. And I said, I hate to, sometimes you have to ask personal questions. Are you on good terms with your wife? Are you planning a divorce? He goes, no, absolutely not. Greatest marriage ever, 40 years. Yeah. And I said, that's a shame as far as your taxes are concerned, because it's impossible to really argue that when your house was in New Jersey and your kids were in New Jersey and your wife was in New Jersey, it's almost impossible for me to argue that you ever that that it wasn't in the back of your head that eventually you were going to return to New Jersey. And that's the test of domicile. So anyway, I really segued off the subject. So for corporations, it's a lot easier. And this is a point that you have to know for the final, okay? So corporations, like individuals, have a domicile. And in the case of a business, it's called a commercial domicile, all right? So corporations don't have domiciles, they have commercial domiciles. And it is not the state of incorporation, because then everybody would be domiciled in Delaware, right? So it's not the state of incorporation. It's something else. And as usual, there's two theories on the subject. There's brain theory and there's Braun theory. Brain theory means a company is domiciled where the brains of the company reside. In other words, where does the CEO and the CFO and the top management, where does the top management report to work on a daily basis? I think last time I looked, 45 of the 50 states subscribe to the brain theory, saying that, hey, wherever the brains of the company, wherever the headquarters of the company are, that's the commercial domicile. 5 out of the 50 states, or 10%, subscribe to the Braun theory. That is, where does the state own most of its property and have most of its operations? Whichever state has the most, has a plurality of that. So in a Braun theory situation, it's whichever state they have the most factories or the most people, or whichever. There's got to be a state that has a little bit more than the other states, and that is the domicile state. So put that on your vocab list. That's a testable item. Brain theory, commercial domicile. Braun theory, commercial domicile. All right. Now, in this case, with New York, with mobile, it's easy. New York, as you would imagine, is a brain state. So New York says wherever that you're domiciled, where, and Vermont is evidently a brain state as well. But Vermont recognizes that New York is the domicile of the company, but they say, so what? Who cares? That's not important here. We think that these dividends are part of the pie. And they actually win the case for I don't want to belabor the point, they win the case for exactly the same point that Wisconsin won in the Exxon case. And that's because it's a unitary business, right? Overseas, what does the subsidiary do? Well, they're not in some completely different business. They're drilling for oil. And then in Vermont, they're selling the oil that they drill for in Saudi Arabia. So they're saying, hey, you're an integrated oil company. There's intercompany transactions. You're unitary. Vermont, you're free to tax the dividend. Okay, and that's the outcome in this case. I only belabored the point because I wanted to introduce to you the concept of domicile. So this is probably a good time to pause for questions. Anything? Question from Philip: is domicile and residency the same thing? Great question. People have gone to jail, Philip, for not understanding the difference between domicile and residency. For individual taxes, let's say in New York, there's two ways. There's two ways that you can be required to file a residency return for New York. One, you pass the residency test, or you pass the domicile test. The residency test is, do you have a permanent place of abode, and are you in New York more than 183 days? You pass those, fine. You're a resident. You're not in New York 183 days, fine. You don't pass the residency test. But here's what everybody always forgets: the domicile test. And I see this all the time. As a matter of fact, one of my neighbors, who's the tax commissioner of New Jersey, told me recently, and again, he didn't realize that this was my client, but he said he said somebody was under criminal, and he gave me a name. Someone was under criminal investigation because they forgot the difference between domicile and residency, right? That it's a double-edged test, right? You could go live in Florida for 350 days. You could stay down there 365 days. So what? If your intention is to return to New Jersey a year later, you probably never lost your New Jersey domicile. Okay, Philip, did I answer the question? Oh, you had put that down privately. I am sorry that I mentioned your name. Yes, okay, cool. Anybody else? Okay, I'll move on. So, all right, so following mobile in the book, there's some really good questions that, of course, they ask the question, but they don't really give you the answer. So I thought I would go through them. Some are more important than others. Question number 1 in Note A was, why did the taxpayer in mobile focus on apportionability issue rather than the fair apportionment question? And because they wanted, basically because they got greedy, they wanted an outright win in the case, right? By saying it was, if they argued fair apportionment, they would have ended up paying something to Vermont, right? The argument would have been not whether it's in the same pie, but how big a slice of the pie. Rather, they were trying to say it's a different pie. So mobile was trying to win, didn't want to pay Vermont a penny on that dividend, and that's drove their thinking. All right, question 2 is not that important. Question 3 is not that important. And I'll skip to 4, even though I already answered it. Could New York, the then domicile state, have taxed the dividends simply by being the domicile state? The answer is yes, because domicile states don't have to abide by all of these apportionment rules. They do, but they don't have to. So New York could have taxed all of the dividends had they tried, or they could have taxed some of the dividends had they been interested in doing so. But for reasons I already chose, New York chose not to tax the dividends. Now, is New York's treatment have any impact at all on Vermont's treatment? Which is like the last question that he asked here. Said, had New York taxed dividends, would the result in this case have been different? Absolutely not. It would have been exactly the same, right? Just because New York's taxing something doesn't take away Vermont's right to tax it, right? So so I think you're familiar with that concept by now. So what one state does doesn't impact another state typically, or as a general matter. Okay. I can't move on. This is not something I would test you on, but it just seems so right to talk about this a little bit. So one issue that has come up in the past on dividends, and now and this was like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it came up a lot. And now it's sort of very recently, it's come up all over again, was whether or not there should be factor representation for dividends. What I mean here is sort of picture this in your own mind. Okay, so by factor representation, they mean, so let's say that General Motors owned 10% of Ford, and Ford paid them, $100 million dividend because of that ownership. What factor representation would mean is that you would look through to Ford and pick up 10% of Ford's sales, pick up 10% of Ford's property, and pick up 10% of their payroll, and then put them into the factors of the parent company. And this was, I guess, like it was like I think it was like about 20 years ago. Actually, now that I think about it, it was probably more like 30 years ago because I'm just remembering a particular conversation, and I remember what was going on in my life at that time. So yeah, I guess it was like more like 30 years ago. People were there was one practitioner in New York, very very well known, Paul Frankel, very nice guy, and he's passed away quite a while now. And this was his little pet project, was to get the states to include in the factors all of these dividends. Now you would think, isn't this going to something that sometimes it could hurt you, sometimes it could help you? But his theory was he wanted all of the foreign dividends to be included in the factors, and that would only help people. And now, notwithstanding the fact that this would be almost impossible to imagine trying to prepare a tax return and figuring out all of the underlying sales and property and payroll of companies that you had a couple of shares of stock in. It seems to almost boggle your mind. Like it would be so immensely complex to have a system like this. And this guy Paul Frankel, he used to come to meetings. He was a very flamboyant guy. He used to scream out, remember the revolutionary theme was no taxation without representation. He would start meetings, no taxation without factor representation. Anyway, it was sort of like his pet project. It never really went anywhere. No state was stupid enough to create a scheme like that. And the only reason I really mention it is that it came up again recently. And as you might know, I'm sure many of you from your federal classes have heard about GILTI. That's a new classification of income that was created 2 years ago. And that all had to do with 2 years ago, the Congress, after many, many, many years of deliberation on this point, finally went to a territorial system. A territorial system meant that the United States was only going to tax profits that were incurred inside of the United States and not tax income that was earned overseas. And that was in theory what they did, except that they really didn't do that at all. They created a partial territorial system such that companies, the whole reason why they wanted to do away with the old worldwide system and adopt a territorial system was that US companies got a deferral on their taxes until they repatriated money back to the United States. And a lot of people thought, well, that's that kind of stupid. We're encouraging American companies to keep all their money overseas. Wouldn't it be smarter if we had them bring their money back to the United States? So that was the thought. We would adopt this territorial system. So back in 2018, when they did this, it was, they couldn't get everybody to compromise. So what they came up with this compromise instead. And basically they got rid of the deferral, but that certain amount of foreign income has to be taxed currently in the United States every single year, the so-called GILTI amount, GILTI, global, what is it? Global low taxed, global intangible low taxed income. It's a misnomer because it applies to all income that's earned overseas. So anyway, long story short, I'm just confused. Long story longer, as a friend of mine always says. Every year, included in the federal tax base is this GILTI number. The issue that then arises, all of a sudden the states saw this cornucopia of money in front of them saying, wait a minute, the federal government is taxing GILTI. We should tax GILTI as well. And in fact, many states ultimately decided not to tax the GILTI because of local pressure that was brought against them from doing it. But New Jersey decided not to do. New Jersey saw, hey, a huge swath of money here, and they would decide to tax it. So the issue then came up, well, maybe New Jersey should grant relief for that. And this whole thought of maybe what they need to do is not just include the GILTI as part of your sales factor, but to actually gross it up and say, okay, how much overseas sales? Let's let's say $10 million of GILTI came, but that's net income passed up. They're saying maybe we should gross that up and pick up the gross of that foreign subsidiary and bring that up. So again, it was Paul's old idea of factor representation. So it came up, it died a quick death. Nobody realized, no one thought that this was very viable or very, but what New Jersey did do was said that, okay, we're going to tax guilty, but what we'll do to you taxpayers will allow you to include it in the sales denominator, but never the sales numerator. So in fact, there's some dilution, or there, so that there's a lower, so that they're taking a lot and giving back a little. But so it sort of came up a little bit, but it reminded me of this whole Paul Frankel thing. The book devotes like note B after mobile talks about this factor up, doesn't really explain it in any great detail. I explained it in more detail, but of course none of you understood what I was talking about. So, but I will tell you that this will not be on the final, okay? I would never bring up a theory that was floated 30 years ago and rejected 29 years ago as being ludicrous. So, anyway, that's the story on factor representation. Okay, next case in the book is interesting. ASARCO versus Indiana. And of course, the name ASARCO should be very familiar to you with, because they were an actor in Allied Signal. Remember, Bendix sold ASARCO, and the issue was whether or not that was taxable to Allied Signal, right? And the point was that no, it wasn't part of the pie. Well, believe it or not, ASARCO was in a case of their own, and right around the same time in 1982. And in ASARCO versus Indiana, the subject is slightly different. It's whether ASARCO itself, leaving out Bendix as one of its owners, what the case was all about was whether ASARCO itself was unitary. And ASARCO had, if you may remember the facts, they were a mining company. They had gold mines in the US, they had copper mines in Chile, they had other mines in Australia, they had mines all over the place. They mined gold, they mined iron, they mined coal, anything that you could mine, they mined. And the issue in the case is whether or not this group of mining companies is unitary with each other. And Idaho, I'm sorry, did I say not Idaho, Indiana? I'm sorry, Indiana. Those I-states are confusing. So anyway, the issue in the case is, can Idaho tax the interest, dividends, and capital gains that are flowing up from the subsidiaries? And of course, if you're familiar with Mobile versus Vermont, you would say, well, yeah, if they're unitary, right? Then any state, it's not just the domicile state, but any state can include it in the pie and apportion some of the income. They reach a strange conclusion in this case, and that's why this case is one of your go-to cases, because believe it or not, the Supreme Court decides that this is not a unitary organization, notwithstanding the fact that they introduce into evidence that guys from one mine were running down to the other mine and helping them out, and the other, they were sharing mining ideas. They would get together and they would share like how to build a good mine and how to run a mine, and all of this usual indicia of unitariness. I know you could think of, how does a gold mine in one country affect a gold mine in a different country? But clearly they were developing technology. One was developing a technology that they were using somewhere else. So there was some. If you were looking for it, you could have found the unitariness. And I guess that day the Supreme Court was in a contrary mood, because they find that there isn't enough exchange of value among these companies. ASARCO wins the case. It's one of those rare cases where that the court concludes that the companies are not unitary. On the very same day, the Woolworth case is decided by the Supreme Court, and guess what? It's exactly the same result. Woolworth is sort of the Five Below of 30 years ago, well, 40 years ago. They were like the super discount store that you could buy all kinds of garbage in. And it was, the so-called, it was the Five and Dime, it was called. And it was actually, they made a lot of money at one time. In fact, you may have seen in Lower Manhattan the Woolworth Building, which was the capital of this organization, and they pretty much sold. They were all over the world. They were pretty much in the same business everywhere of selling, cheap junk, and the issue is the same. The British Woolworths is paying dividends up to the American Woolworth parent, and they're arguing that they're non-unitary, and they win the case. And they're introduced into evidence that the Woolworth in London is differently managed than the one in the United States. They have separate management. They buy different items. The British buy different junk than Americans buy, and they're able to prove this level of independence. Although I would have argued, if I was arguing in favor of the government, God forbid I would ever do that, but if I was arguing in favor of the government, I would have said, isn't the Woolworth name itself a unitizing factor? Like, wouldn't you say Coca-Cola is such a powerful trademark that alone would create unity among the companies of Coca-Cola? And you would think the same thing, even though Woolworths went bankrupt and is now out of business. Back in their day, they were a Dow 30 stock. They were once a force to be reckoned with. They were one of the most powerful retailers in the country, in the world, and you would have thought that just the intangible value of their name was a unitizing factor. So I always, whenever you have to argue that something is not unitary, Asarco and Woolworth are your go-to cases. All right, so now I'm done with that. Now I'm done with what I call level 2. Now I'm moving on to level 3, which is going to take like 4 minutes to discuss. And that's combined reporting. So as many of you may know, for federal tax purposes, if you have a 100-company group, all 100 companies typically join together and file a single tax return, right? At the state level, though, it used to be very different. When I got my start back in 1978, the only 2 states required a group of companies to file as a single company and to require combined reporting. And that was, those 2 states were Illinois, where it started, and then California. Nobody else had it. So if you were in New York and you had 100 companies, you filed 100 different returns. Up until this year, 2019, well, I'm always a year, but tax people were always a year behind. I think of this year as being 2019. Up until 2018, New Jersey, you had 100 companies, you filed 100 returns. This year, in 2019, New Jersey's adopting combined reporting. Only they're having a lot of trouble. They're having a lot of trouble with it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So the issue is, when can a state require companies to file on a combined basis? And wouldn't you know it, same test all over again. Generally, they have to be a unitary group of companies. In fact, this is often when people use the term unitary in a misleading way. They think unitary taxation means combined reporting. So you know a lot more. Unitary taxation is about a lot of things. It's about apportionment, and it's about combined reporting. So it's really about both. I always correct people when they say Aren't they subject to unitary taxation there? I said, no, we're all subject to unitary taxation. That state requires combined reporting. Big difference. So use the right terminology. But in order to require companies to file on a combined basis, there has to be a unitary group. That's about all I have to say about level 3, because I'm going to combine it with level 4. This is, and again, this is all my own terminology. Level 4 is, hold on to your hats, worldwide combined reporting. In level 3, I was referring to a domestic group of companies. So companies that operate in the 50 states, they're required to file combined. There are a number of states that allow worldwide reporting, typically as an option, but it used to be that some states required worldwide combined reporting in all instances. This was the great gift of California to the country. Let's talk about this for a second, because this is an amazing thing. And it all, and to give you a little bit of history about it, it all revolved around California's frustration with not being able to tax foreign companies in general, but Japanese companies in particular. And what often, now, back at the beginning of this semester, I talked about how the international system is different from the state system, right? The state system is based upon apportionment. The federal system, or the international system, is based upon separate accounting. Well, if you, a big problem that the US states had with the Japanese conglomerates, which back in the 1980s were huge in the United States. Not so huge today, but very big. Back then in the 1980s, Japan was expanding rapidly, buying up a lot of American companies. It didn't end well, so they ended up retreating and selling most of their U.S. assets. But for a large time, Japanese companies were expanding all over the United States, but they were reporting almost no profits in the U.S. And the states were getting frustrated. They felt like, you know, the largest Japanese companies were reporting, well, we make all our money in Japan, we make very little money in the United States. And that's, if you looked at their federal return, they would show, you know, 5 billion of receipts and 4.9 billion of expenses against it. And the states got very frustrated with that. California especially got frustrated with that and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tax the worldwide operations of the company. That's the pie. We want every single nickel you earn all over the world. That's our pie. And then we're going to split up that pie to California. And this was all to snare the Japanese, basically, and say, okay, right? You want a transfer price like that? Fine. We can deal with that. We're now, all right, so you made 5 billion in the United States. Okay, but you made 50 billion in the world. All right, we want our piece of that 50 billion. Now think about this for a second. Imagine how complex this would be. And it worked both ways. It worked for a Japanese company operating that had nexus in California, and it worked for an American company that had nexus in California but had worldwide operations. What California was arguing was prepare a California return incorporating everybody. Now think about this for a second, particularly as hard as this would be for an American company, picture how hard this would be for a foreign company to try to comply with. They, so let's say, and I'm thinking of a specific instance here. I remember I had a Japanese client that had operations in 150 different countries. All of those countries were in local currency. It all rolled up not to American accounting standards, but the Japanese company put out IFRS statements. That's international accounting standards, very different from American GAAP. How do you prepare a US return? Well, you start off with US GAAP, and then via the Schedule M's on the federal return, you convert that into a federal tax return. Well, listen to this. So the Japanese company would basically have to take all of its worldwide operations, convert them from whatever local currencies back into yen, right? Prepare a Japanese financial statement from that. All right, they were probably doing that anyway. Prepare a Japanese, then take that Japanese financial statement, turn it into an American financial statement, then take that American financial statement and turn it into a make-believe pro forma federal income tax return, and then take that federal income tax return and turn that into a California return, and then we'll slice that up under the California apportionment. It took roughly 13 million years to prepare a California return for all the information that had to be gathered. Of course, by the time you actually put it all together, you owed another 13 million years worth of returns because it took so long to sort of figure this out. Very complex system. As you can imagine, the rest of the world was very angry with California. And in fact, they brought up, recall, the Foreign Commerce Clause. What's the sixth prong? Is California interfering with the international relationships of the United States? Arguably they were, because I'll tell you, they were pissing the shit out of Japan at the time. And not just Japan, but Britain, France, Germany, they were all bitterly opposed. And they said if California kept this up, there was going to be some immense retaliation against the United States as a whole. Leading us into the case that comes up next, which is interesting on a couple of levels. So I'll go over the facts of it fairly quickly. And quite honestly, this was not a great example of a unitary company. So this was, so the case is Container Corp. And in fact, this was not a very unitary company. This company made cardboard boxes. And as you can imagine, there's nothing particularly sophisticated about cardboard boxes, right? It's sort of, there's not any advanced technology involved in it. They're making boxes today pretty much the way they made boxes 100 years ago. This Container Corp was an American company, and they had 20 foreign subsidiaries, mostly in Europe and Latin America. And there's almost no coordination. Each of the subsidiaries is separately managed. They actually are fairly autonomous on their day-to-day management. They each make their own boxes. They each have their own clients. There's no economies of scale. They can't point to anything except one little thing. The parent company in the United States guaranteed the debt of the foreign subsidiary. So arguably, the U.S. parent got them a lower interest rate because they were able to put up more collateral for their borrowing. That's about the only unitizing factor they can create. So 3 issues come up in the case. Are they unitary? Was the apportionment fair? And did the Foreign Commerce Clause preclude California from applying the combined reporting approach? In other words, was California interfering in the foreign relations of the United States? Well, the case itself isn't really all that interesting, except in its holding. And so I'll sort of skim through it quickly. They find the Supreme Court finds a unitary business here, which is a little startling because, and they come up with a new test. And I guess, and it, it probably should be remembered if only for this test, but the test they come up with is that, well, the fact that the parent was, as I mentioned before, was guaranteeing the sub's debt, that was sort of an exchange of value among the companies, right? So, and that's it. That's what we're looking. We're not looking so much for a flow of goods as we're looking for a flow of value among the companies. And that's, on a micro scale, that's what Container probably can be remembered for. And it's what's startling about it was this case was decided right around like a year after Woolworth and Asarco, and there they didn't look at exchange of value, right? There was arguably a lot more exchange of value in both Woolworth and Asarco, right? Woolworth being the company name, and Asarco because they were trading technology, they were trading best practices with each other. That was probably more of an exchange of value than this one, right? A stupid box company. So anyway, so the Supreme Court does like this about face, but of course they never say that they're doing it about face. So that all of a sudden they're back to being a lot more, taking a very liberal view towards a unitary business, right? All there has to be is an exchange of value among the companies. And then on the second point, whether the apportionment fair, who cares? Yeah, they concluded it was fair because they always conclude that it's fair. And then, you know, it's a constitutional matter. And then finally they get into the issue as, well, was California interfering with the foreign relationships of the United States? And they say, no, it's fair. Who cares? It's not a one. They just simply conclude. They don't really get into it then, but they just say it's not a one voice problem. It's other countries don't like it. They can lump it, you know, basically. So, but the macro, so on a macro level, it's noteworthy, you know, because they introduced the exchange of value concept. But on a macro level, it's really important because they approved, the U.S. Supreme Court approved worldwide reporting, and that was a hell of a thing at the time. Now, it didn't really end there, because for all of, you know, just for all the practical reasons, you know, and first of all, consider what year this is. This is the early 1980s. The computer, the personal computer, had just been invented the year before. They weren't in very good use. Back then, you know how we prepared tax returns? Carbon paper was very important. Penmanship was critically important. If you wanted to be a tax guy, you had to have a good handwriting because everything was done pencil and paper. And if people couldn't figure out your handwriting, I remember they were knuckleheads that were morons, but then you saw how beautifully they wrote. You realize, oh, they had the job because they had a great penmanship. You know, that was big back then. Was a good handwriting, and you know, carbon paper and all of that, and you know, we would Xerox the return. It took forever. Back then, I was in my first tax job at E.F. Hutton and Company, and we prepared the tax returns with long handwritten spreadsheets in pencil, which we then Xeroxed and handed into the government. So things were done very differently back then. It was very labor intensive, and for California to be insisting on this worldwide reporting was, you know, was like great for us in the sense of it created a lot of work. It created a lot of demand for accountants and tax people, a huge demand for accountants and tax people. Bad news in the sense of the only way they can economically make this work was by making everybody work, you know, 20 hours a day. It was, you know, there was only so much people were going to pay for a California tax return, notwithstanding all the effort that went into it. So anyway, so it was a bad state of affairs. So companies kept complaining about it, and it wasn't the end of it. There were two more cases that were brought, Barclays and Colgate. Both decided on the same day, where again it was the California system was upheld, but with a big but. And the big but was that the state had to allow for reasonable estimates. So in other words, they had to be reasonable. They couldn't make you figure out the Uganda return to the 18th decimal place and then roll that into the Japanese return and then, you know, roll that into the California return. They had to allow, and that's all they said was reasonable estimates. Now I'm going to show you the value of remembering little things like that, because last year when New Jersey adopted combined reporting, they adopted a worldwide option, saying, again, it was optional. People could do it or not do it. Now, a lot of the California tech companies operate all over the world. They make money all over the world, but they don't make a lot of money outside the United States. They make all that, they have tons of receipts from overseas, but they make almost all of their profit in the United States. Well, as you could imagine, those people are going to want worldwide reporting, right? Because you're bringing in very little profit, but you're bringing in a lot of overseas sales, right? So the dilution in your sales factor overcomes the amount of taxable income that you're bringing in to the return. So all of the California tech companies, as soon as New Jersey adopted optional worldwide reporting, they wanted in, except that they wanted their reasonable estimates. And if you looked at the New Jersey law that was written, legislature did their job. They said they prescribed the system. They said, okay, we start with foreign financials, translate that into a U.S. tax return, translate that into a federal return, and translate that into a New Jersey return. And then 14 billion years later, you'll have your return. But then in the very next sentence, they said, however, if this is too difficult, come up with, on your own, come up with something different. But and use that, except that you got to approve it with us first. So I got a hell of a gig. These tech companies hired me to go to New Jersey and to invoke that very sentence and say, hey, they had their methodology for preparing their California worldwide return. Here's how we want to prepare our New Jersey worldwide return. Now, you think that's pretty simple, right? California's had this in place for 40 years. So you would think New Jersey's new to the game. So they would just adopt whatever California was doing. But no, they kept putting me off. And like pretty much 6 months went by. I didn't have an answer. So finally, I just wrote a very direct email. And I said, I want an answer. And they wrote somebody very high up, Division of Taxation, wrote back to me and said, tough shit. You are probably not going to decide this for a year. And I immediately wrote back saying, excuse me, you may want to look at the Barclays case. And then after you read the Barclays case, you may want to look at the legislative language again, because they're not asking you to come up with an alternative method. They're telling you to come up with an alternative method. They're saying taxpayer can propose something different, and you have to say yes or no. Now, if you want to say no, that's your privilege. But you have to give me an answer. And I got back a very apologetic email. Within 24 hours, I got back a very apologetic email saying, you're absolutely right. We have to give you an answer. We'll give us a couple of days. We'll give you an answer. And sure enough, they were good at their word. Within a couple of days, I had an answer saying, "Yep, California allows it. We'll allow it." And whatever shortcuts California allowed, we'll allow as well. See, it's good. It's sometimes very useful to know little sentences in old cases. So I promised you a good story, and I'm now going to deliver. Okay. And by the way, I'm still coming in loud and clear. All still there? A couple people? Ring me back? Chat me back? Yep. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. So here's the story. So back in the period when the Japanese companies hated California and wanted this system to end more than anything else in the world, even if it helped them, they didn't want it. They were saying, we do not want to be taxed on a world. We don't want to reveal all of this information to California. You're asking us to reveal all sorts of secret information, which we just don't want to do. So that was, and it wasn't just Japan. It was when Barclays was decided. It was funny. They all hired every foreign country hired law firms, and so Japan was arguing in their brief how to interpret the Constitution. And it was like, I remember thinking to myself, well, who are they to argue how the United States Constitution should be interpreted? But I guess they could, being that their country's taxpayers were taxpayers into this. But anyway, at any rate, I was hired to represent, actually not me personally, my firm was hired to represent, and I got the job of meeting with this company and deciding. And all I was told was it was a Japanese company. They're being audited by California, and they don't want to be taxed. They only filed a U.S. return, and they're in 150 countries. They don't want to report all of their worldwide income. They say it's too repressive, too impossible. It's unconstitutional. They don't want to do it, and that I should meet with the agent and explain this to them. So anyway, I decide probably it's a good idea if I actually find out something about this company. And of course, what I wasn't really prepared for was the little bit of a culture shock I got, because I went to this company, and it was in the middle of New York City, and I went there, and I go up to their floor, and I go into their space, and I might as well be in Japan at this point. No one speaks English. No, it was all the cultural norms, of Japan of 1980. And let's see, this is probably no, this is more like the middle 80s. I'm sorry. So it was all the cultural norms of Japan back, around that era. And in fact, and this is the part I almost enjoyed most until this hysterical meeting occurs. But anyway, I go in, I have to meet with the company. They want to know all about American or Californian taxation. And I enter this room. I'm not prepared that I'm meeting with 50 people, and they're all arranged along this long table that's like a quarter of a mile long. And the only empty chair is at the end of the table. So I like, they all want to look at me. So I sit down at the end of the table. I was like tempted to say, thank you for coming, to all of these people. And then I observe how everything is arranged. The people closest to me are like in their 20s, and the people a little bit further away are in their 30s, and the people a little bit further away they're in their 40s, and then a little further are in their 50s and their 60s. And the guy opposite me, I could barely see him because he's like a quarter of a mile away. He's about 173, and he can't even sit upright in his chair. He's like bent over. See, this is what you're missing. You're missing the visual part of this. He's bent over in his chair, and he's like falling asleep, and they're asking me questions, and like one person in the room speaks English, and they're asking me, so how do we win this case? And I said, well, you have to prove, among other things, you would have to prove that you're completely independent of your Japanese parent, that you have independent management in place. So they all talk amongst them. For the next half hour, they talk amongst themselves in Japanese. And they're arguing with each other, and they're all come back to me, and they're all asking for the 170-year-old man to approve, and they're all explaining, and it's like they can't get through to him, and finally he nods his head. So they come back to me and they go, yes, we are closely managed by the Japanese company. And I go, well, that's bad. You didn't understand. You have to be, if you want to beat this thing, you have to prove that you're independent of the Japanese company. So they now talk amongst themselves in Japanese for another half an hour, and then they come back to me and they said, we are completely independent of the Japanese parent. And then I said, so what business are you all in? And they tell, oh yeah, we make widgets, And I said, oh, where do you get your widgets from? We get them from Japan. I said, well, that's bad. Then another half hour goes by, they go, we don't get any of our widgets from Japan. So no matter what I said, they would always come up with the answer that they want, and which was very disconcerting, because it seemed to me that they were lying, and that they were just they were just telling whatever tall story that they needed to tell in order to get through this. So anyway, I spend the next week at this company, and it's almost like a Monty Python skit. No matter what I say to them, they say the wrong thing, and then they correct it later on. But after a week of me, they kind of have a strong sense of what they have to convey to the agent. So the agent comes in from California, and wouldn't you know it, they were expecting this man that they had met before, this I had met him too, this very nice, reasonable older man, and he didn't show. He wasn't feeling well that day, so they sent a young woman, and the guy that they picked to give the answers for the company was, you could say he didn't want to deal with a woman. And he already had his backup. He didn't want to answer her questions. And I was telling him, no, you got to answer her questions. Otherwise, they're just going to enter a default judgment. They'll just make up a number and enforce it against you because you're not cooperating. So you have to show cooperation with this woman. Now, I think I may have left out. The one thing I did figure out in this company was that worldwide reporting was going to help them enormously. It was going to turn a U.S. profit into a worldwide loss. They had every reason to claim worldwide reporting, but they didn't want to do that because it seemed like the entire government of Japan was telling them not under any circumstance, even if it was helpful. But I tried to pull the agent aside and sort of explain to her that that this company had you were going to owe them a refund if you went forward with the worldwide reporting. And she looked at me and she goes, well, you got to prove that. And that, one, you got to prove that. And two, all right, if they do a refund, we'll pay them a refund. But that's the law of California. And if you want to file separate, you got to prove that you're non-unitary. So comes in, she's loaded for bear. She's asking every single question you could imagine. And she's like looking around the room, and all she sees are people, and we're not like in a conference room, we're sort of like out in the open. And all she sees around her is hundreds of people speaking Japanese, and they're running around, one of her first questions is, are many of the executives of this company, Japanese executives that are floating in from Japan? And before I could say a word, this guy says, no, everybody working here is an American. And she looked at me like she was expecting, like, is this guy for real? And and at that point, I don't know what to do. There's like the look on my face is absolutely frozen. So now a little bit of segue. As a representative, as an attorney, as an accountant, it is very important that your clients do not lie. If your clients are lying, you should break off trust me, you guys have worked hard to get to the point where you have in your life. It is never worth it to lie. You don't lie for your good clients. You certainly don't lie for some little schmucky client that you might have. And that's what these people, at the end of the day, that's what these people were. They were overestimating their importance to me. And that was a mistake. But what they couldn't do in my presence was lie. So I couldn't look at the agent and say, well, obviously he's full of shit, because not a single person in this building can even speak English, and it's obvious that they're all Japanese nationals who are floating through the United States for a couple of months. So I couldn't say I couldn't say that, but I couldn't agree with him either. I should say a segue. Important thing to note: if your client is lying, you need to end that representation, but you don't do it at that moment. You don't throw your hands up in the air and storm out of the room. Then you have a lawsuit against you, right? That you misrepresented, that you prejudiced the company's case. What you do in a situation like that is you tell the judge you can no longer represent this person, or in this instance, you go to lunch and you don't come back. And at that moment, I realized this was a situation where I had to go to lunch and not come back. And so I look at my watch, it's 10 after 9. I got a long way to lunchtime. So I'm going to have to sit through, if this is the way the first, sentence went. Well, for the next few hours, it was like being in the Twilight Zone. She's asking all of these questions. She's loaded for bear. She has done her research. She's got them down. She's read their reports. She knows that this is one big integrated company. she's citing one statistic after another, and he's just denying. He's just like lying, through his teeth, at them. And I can't. And basically, I did my job all too well. I told this guy what they needed to prove, and he was saying all of the right things. Unfortunately, none of them were true. Right? They were all just he makes this up. So it's getting crazier and crazier and crazier. And basically, at this point, I don't even have my eyes open. I'm sitting there with my eyes closed. I can't look at him. I can't look at her. I don't know. I every now and then I look at my watch. It seems, it must be almost noon now. And it's like 9:30, and it's unbearable. The day is just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Although in a way better, because now no one back at my firm can question why I left and didn't go back, because this was absolutely intolerable. They weren't stretching a point. They were just, this was just outright complete lunacy that they were saying, and anybody could realize this. It wasn't they weren't stretching, that they weren't kidding her a little bit. They were just outright making stuff up. So anyway, I say I did my job too well, except for one little thing. There was one little thing I didn't prepare him for. And that was, what is the first thing an agent asks for as soon as they walk into, before they even take their coat off? They always want a waiver to the statute of limitations, right? They always say, oh, you get 3 years to audit? They want they need an extra year. And of course, I always tell clients to sign them, typically. Give them, you got to give them time. Otherwise it's, so she forgot to ask, and then just as we're breaking for lunch, finally it's noon, and I'm saying, hey, why don't we break for lunch? And she's saying, great. And then she goes, oh, one thing. And she takes out of her purse, I need you guys to sign a waiver. And she throws it down on the table. And that was the one thing I was authorized to do, being I had that power of attorney. I could sign the waiver. I start reaching for it, and my friend from the company, he pulls it out of my hand, and he like looks at her, and he goes, I can't sign this. And she goes, well, Mr. Corman can sign it. He goes, no, he can't sign it. I can sign it. She goes, well, can anybody here sign this? He goes, no, this has to go back to Japan for signature. All right, well, if I was in front of you, I would expect a big laugh at this point, because he had just said the one thing he shouldn't have said. If he spent the whole morning arguing how the company was completely independent, now he's saying he's not even authorized to sign a waiver of the statute of limitations. It was, I unfortunately I lost it at that point. I started laughing so hard that she started looking at me. He started looking at me. I went to lunch. I didn't come back. And by the afternoon, there were complaints were being lodged with my firm that by laughing at him, I had made him look foolish, and now they were in a disadvantageous place. But they were blaming it all on me for like just like laughing at this nutcase. So anyway, that was my story. I need some feedback. Good story? Was that a 10 out of a 10? Come on, that was a 10 out of a 10. On tax stories, I've only told that story 5 million times. Okay, good story. All right. Oh, look how late it is. It's 10 to 9. All right, so next week we don't meet, do we? So somebody said it should be made into a movie. Yeah, yes, we have no class next week. And fine, thank you. So when we get back, we're going to start working on the actual statute of apportionment, which is the UDIPTA statute. Now, I know you guys don't do a lot of the reading, assuming that I do a great job with the case, telling you about all you need to know about the cases. But the UDIPTA statute you need to read. Here's the good news. It's about 7 pages long. It's really, really short. It's very understandable. It's in English. It's almost like written at a 3rd grade reading level. It's very easy to understand. And the final, I would say, a third of the final is going to be on the UDIPTA statute. Okay, so if that doesn't get you worked up, nothing will. So when you look at it, now here's where the people with the 11th edition are a little bit of a disadvantage because there's too much information. It's twice as long because they're in the process right now of amending UDIPTA, but it's just a proposal and it's all nonsense. I can't be bothered with it. So for those of you with the 11th edition, the proposed changes are in italics. Just skip everything in italics and just read. But if the italics are throwing you off, maybe just cross out those lines, or just, you know, on the internet you can get what's in the book. You can get I'll tell you what, I'll just post it. Okay, so this way you'll have like a 4-page like a 5 or 6 page version of it instead of the book. Okay, now in reading it, as when you read any statute, this is a model statute. So this was put together by law professors, and of course the states adopted word for word. Okay, so as when reading any statute, the definitions, the first section are like 5 or 6 definitions. Read the definitions. The rest of it doesn't make sense unless you know the definitions. Okay, and one of the definitions, by the way, you'll see are commercial domicile. You'll see that they adopt the Brain theory and not the Braun theory of commercial domicile. So so read that, and then you'll see under the statute there are comments. The comments are gold. Read now the comments are not really are part of the statute. They just explain the statute, but it is gold. As a matter of fact, that's where I take my exam questions, are out of the comments. So read the comments. Okay, if you read it without the comments, it'll take you 10 minutes. If you read it with the comments, it'll take you 20 minutes. Okay, so it's not that major a commitment of time. Okay, all right, guys, have a great week off. I am so looking forward to this weekend. I've been working outrageous, crazy days, and there's been a lot of questions. People have asked me in emails. I said, I'm sorry, I'm too busy. I'm going to try to catch up on those emails this weekend. So if you wrote me an email, which I never replied to, your answer is coming. So, okay. So I apologize for pushing things off, but I'll tell you, there's only 20. They need to invent. Congress has to put a few more extra hours into every day because there's just not enough time these days. So anyway, I hope everyone's getting used to this crazy existence that we're in. Think of it this way: when you're 80 years old, you'll be telling your grandchildren about these few weeks, and they'll be looking at you in total disbelief. But it's really something, isn't it? So anyway, all of you stay well. Love you all. Stay well. And, you know, if you need me, call me, email me, whatever. Just, you know, stay in touch. Okay. Good night.